Chapter 2, Part 1 of Queen Victoria. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Queen Victoria by Giles Lytton Strachey. Chapter 2, Part 1. Chapter 2, Childhood. 1. The child who, in these not very impressive circumstances, appeared in the world, received but scant attention. There was small reason to foresee her destiny. The Duchess of Clarence, 2 months before, had given birth to a daughter. This infant, indeed, had died almost immediately, but it seemed highly probable that the Duchess would again become a mother. And so it actually fell out. More than this, the Duchess of Kent was young, and the Duke was strong, and there was every likelihood that before long a brother would follow, to snatch her faint chance of the succession from the little Princess. Nevertheless, the Duke had other views. There were prophecies. At any rate, he would christen the child Elizabeth, a name of happy augury. In this, however, he reckoned without the Regent, who, seeing a chance of annoying his brother, suddenly announced that he himself would be present at the baptism, and signified at the same time that one of the godfathers was to be the Emperor Alexander of Russia. And so, when the ceremony took place, and the Archbishop of Canterbury asked by what name he was to baptise the child, the Regent replied, "Alexandria." At this, the Duke ventured to suggest that another name might be added. "Certainly," said the Regent. "Georgina?" "Or Elizabeth?" said the Duke. There was a pause, during which the Archbishop, with the baby in his lawn sleeves, looked with some uneasiness from one prince to the other. "Very well, then," said the Regent at last. "Call her after her mother, but Alexandrina must come first." Thus, to the disgust of her father, the child was christened Alexandrina Victoria. The Duke had other subjects of disgust. The meagre grant of the Commons had by no means put an end to his financial distresses. It was to be feared that his services were not appreciated by the nation. His debts continued to grow. For many years he had lived upon £7,000 a year, but now his expenses were exactly doubled. He could make no further reductions. As it was, there was not a single servant in his meagre grant establishment who was idle for a moment from morning to night. He poured out his griefs in a long letter to Robert Owen, whose sympathy had the great merit of being practical. "I now candidly state," he wrote, "that, after viewing the subject in every possible way, I am satisfied that, to continue to live in England, even in the quiet way in which we are going on, without splendour and without show, nothing short of doubling the £7,000 will do, reduction being impossible." It was clear that he would be obliged to sell his house for £51,300. If that failed, he would go and live on the Continent. "If my services are useful to my country, it surely becomes those who have the power to support me in substantiating those just claims I have for the very extensive losses and privations I have experienced during the very long period of my professional servitude in the colonies. And if this is not attainable, it is a clear proof to me that they are not appreciated, and under that impression I shall not scruple, in due time, to resume my retirement abroad, when the Duchess and myself shall have fulfilled our duties in establishing the English birth of my child, and giving it material nutriment on the soil of Old England, and which we shall certainly repeat, if Providence destines to give us any further increase of family." In the meantime, he decided to spend the winter at Sidmouth, in order, he told Owen, that the Duchess may have the benefit of tepid sea bathing, and our infant that of sea air, on the fine coast of Devonshire, during the months of the year that are so odious in London. In December the move was made. With the new year, the Duke remembered another prophecy. In 1820 a fortune teller had told him 2 members of the royal family would die. Who would they be? He speculated on the various possibilities. The King, it was plain, could not live much longer, and the Duchess of York had been attacked by a mortal disease. Probably it would be the King and the Duchess of York, or perhaps the King and the Duke of York, or the King and the Regent. He himself was one of the healthiest men in England. "My brothers," he declared, "are not so strong as I am. I have lived a regular life. I shall outlive them all. The crown will come to me and my children." He went out for a walk and got his feet wet. On coming home, he neglected to change his stockings. He caught cold, inflammation of the lungs set in, and on January 22nd he was a dying man. By a curious chance, young Dr. Stockmar was staying in the house at the time. 2 years before, he had stood by the deathbed of the Princess Charlotte, and now he was watching the Duke of Kent in his agony. On Stockmar's advice, a will was hastily prepared. The Duke's earthly possessions were of a negative character, but it was important that the guardianship of the unwitting child, whose fortunes were now so strangely changing, should be assured to the Duchess. The Duke was just able to understand the document and to append his signature. Having inquired whether his writing was perfectly clear, he became unconscious, and breathed his last on the following morning. 6 days later came the fulfilment of the second half of the gypsy's prophecy. The long, unhappy, and inglorious life of George III of England was ended. 2. Such was the confusion of affairs at Sidmouth that the Duchess found herself without the means of returning to London. Prince Leopold hurried down, and himself conducted his sister and her family, by slow and bitter stages, to Kensington. The widowed lady, in her voluminous blacks, needed all her equanimity to support her. Her prospects were more dubious than ever. She had £6,000 a year of her own, but her husband's debts loomed before her like a mountain. Soon she learnt that the Duchess of Clarence was once more expecting a child. What had she to look forward to in England? Why should she remain in a foreign country, among strangers, whose language she could not speak, whose customs she could not understand? Surely it would be best to return to Amorbach, and there, among her own people, bring up her daughters in economical obscurity. But she was an inveterate optimist. She had spent her life in struggles, and would not be daunted now. And besides, she adored her baby. "C'est mon bonheur, mes délices, mon existence," she declared. The darling should be brought up as an English princess, whatever lot awaited her. Prince Leopold came forward nobly with an offer of an additional £3,000 a year, and the Duchess remained at Kensington. The child herself was extremely fat, and bore a remarkable resemblance to her grandfather. "C'est l'image du feu roi!" exclaimed the Duchess. "C'est le roi Georges en jupon!" echoed the surrounding ladies, as the little creature waddled with difficulty from one to the other. Before long, the world began to be slightly interested in the nursery at Kensington. When, early in 1821, the Duchess of Clarence's second child, the Princess Elizabeth, died within 3 months of its birth, the interest increased. Great forces and fierce antagonisms seemed to be moving, obscurely, about the royal cradle. It was a time of faction and anger, of violent repression and profound discontent. A powerful movement, which had for long been checked by adverse circumstances, was now spreading throughout the country. New passions, new desires were abroad, or rather, old passions and old desires, reincarnated with a new potency: love of freedom, hatred of injustice, hope for the future of man. The mighty still sat proudly in their seats, dispensing their ancient tyranny, but a storm